Charlie, thank you very much for joining us at the top of the show. What have you learned since you've been in Tel Aviv?
Well, today has been an extraordinary day of death and destruction. The casualty figures now hurtling into the thousands on both sides. And this has definitely become a complex and multi-fronted war in northern Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, northern Israel, in the south of Israel, on the border with Gaza, and even up to Tel Aviv, where we are. There have been attacks, both small arms fire and rockets. There's been artillery from the IDF back into Hamas-controlled areas and airstrikes into Gaza. But there have also been more disturbing reports in the south of Israel, where this morning the government claimed it had secured its border with Gaza. That now appears to have not been the case. In the last hour, 2 terrorists were killed in Mefalsim and another was killed in Sderot, areas that the IDF claimed they had cleared with paratroopers. It now seems that that might not be the case as more violence continues. In the last half-hour meeting with troops, Defence Minister Yoav Gallant said that he had released all restraints and that Israel was now going into a full offence. Now, for people in Gaza, this will obviously be extremely concerning as the number of people killed there approaches 1,000 as targeted airstrikes are launched. But when some of the atrocities become made aware and some of the information coming out of southern Israel reaches the airwaves, the reason for that kind of statement will become more clear, I think, to onlookers. In the last hour, we have heard reports of up to 40 babies being killed in a kibbutz in southern Israel. I think this is the most shocking development of all of the shocking developments we have heard today. It goes beyond the standard massacre and murder that has become commonplace since Saturday. It is a new level of depravity. Many of the people that I've spoken to today, fleeing from southern Israel, fleeing from those kibbutzes, reflecting in great misery and shock at that news. The reports there from the Israeli ambulances and indeed IDF soldiers who cleared out that kibbutz. It's a devastating development.
Thank you, Charlie. Yes, extremely devastating reports if they turn out to be true. You say that Israel will be launching a full offence. What does that mean? What is that likely to mean? We're already seeing targeted airstrikes onto the Gaza area. What else could we see?
Well, in the last 24 hours, the Hamas side, they have launched many targeted rocket attacks into Israel, reaching Ashkelon, where they offered a warning an hour before they sent rockets in there. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad in southern Lebanon also launched rockets into northern Israel. And the Israeli side have reacted with dozens and hundreds of airstrikes into Gaza, especially along the coastline. But the development that is likely now over the next 24 to 48 hours is a ground assault into the Gaza Strip. This hasn't happened by Israeli Defense Forces since 2014, but it's understood that with the restraints being removed, as the Defense Minister says, and as more Israeli troops amass on that southern border with Gaza, which appears porous with terrorists crossing over, that a more direct ground invasion is likely into the Strip. And this will, of course, mean more death and more destruction and much more conflict.
Thank you very much indeed. Charlie Peters there, our reporter live from Tel Aviv, Israel, bringing us the very latest on what is escalating between Israel and Hamas. Bringing in my panel on this. Ben, I'll start with you. Just reacting to what Charlie has said, huge numbers of deaths, now rumours, reports of babies being killed. What is your reaction to how this is unfolding?
So, well, the first thing to identify is that this has all the hallmarks of a massive, audacious terrorist attack.
Yeah.
Hamas may be ostensibly the government of Gaza, but they have perpetrated this attack in the manner of a terrorist one. They haven't had any specific grievance that they've aired. They haven't targeted any military installations in Israel. They've gone in big, and they've killed innocent women and children. They've targeted that party. They've taken a human wall of defense back with them into Gaza so that if Israel attacks, they've got I think they threaten to behead people in public if Israel attacks them without warning in Gaza. And they're continuing to target civilian populations. All of this is terrorism. None of this is, what you might regard as a genuine war. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves, I think, is why would Hamas suddenly go out for this full frontal terrorist assault of Israel now, which they know is going to result in a massive reprisal, in a right, justified, completely supported by the West reprisal. And I think the answer to that, no, we can't know for sure what the answers are, but I suspect the answers to that lie outside Palestine and really in the relationship that Israel was so close to getting with Saudi. And Saudi and Israel were, for the first time, Saudi was going to recognize Israel's existence. There was a promise of more armaments, uranium development, nuclear development for Saudi if it did recognize Israel. And I think Iran saw the sort of proxy battles that they've been having with Saudi through the Middle East for hegemony of the Middle East, moving decidedly in Saudi's favor. And over the last 24 hours, not surprisingly, Saudi has now cancelled its arrangements with Israel, and I think it's been a big geopolitical victory for Iran. So we have to look very carefully at Iran, and of course we know Iran is very closely allied with Russia. So I suspect Russia has a hand in all of this as well.
Ella, I think William Hague wrote in the Times this morning that he thought the motivation on the part of Hamas would be to provoke such a strong response from Israel that Israel might lose the side of public opinion, essentially, for retaliating in such a deemed harsh way. Could that be what we see happen? It's terrible. We look at the bloodshed that is now on both sides. How do you think Israel can respond while keeping public opinion on side?
Well, I think it's really important to think carefully about how we in the West respond to this. And I don't think it's possible or reasonable to compare the two, the actions of Israel and the actions of Hamas and the reactions of Israel, because we have to be pretty clear that Hamas is involved in and interested and invested in the mass destruction of Jews. This isn't any longer I think clearly related to Palestinian liberation movement. It's not, it's the questions of sovereignty and things like that, which are very relevant and important to debate in that region, have kind of been put by the wayside by the recent actions, and a group interested in liberating people doesn't go around allegedly beheading babies.
Well, this is the problem, and we're going to be talking about how this has played out on our own streets, unfortunately, and there do seem to be many people in this country who believe that Hamas are freedom fighters, and I think people need reminding that Hamas does not want freedom for the Palestinians. It wants the destruction of the Jewish state and ergo the Jewish people.
Hamas is a classified terrorist organisation by the British government, so there's no doubt about how we see Hamas in this country. And I do find it quite disturbing that anyone, frankly, in this country would support Hamas. I can understand sympathy for the 2.3 million people in Gaza who have lived for many, many years effectively in a kind of semi-siege environment.
Yeah.
But that doesn't forgive for a second Hamas's actions and the way Hamas goes about its business. And I would urge anyone in this country who has any support for Hamas to think very carefully again. Hamas does not equate to Palestinians. Palestinians are not represented by Hamas. And the other thing to point out, I suppose, just moving slightly on, wasn't Suella Braverman's speech on multiculturalism in this country not working prescient? She made that speech a couple of weeks ago. She reiterated it she made that in Washington, then she reiterated it at the Conservative Party conference. And here we have clear evidence of people on the streets of London who don't see this problem the way I would expect British people with British values to see it, which is an outrageous attack on a peaceful nation that was minding its own business. There's a kind of anger, and it's an anger that's being expressed not from a British perspective, but from a non-British one, which means these people are here not feeling British.
Anna, do you think what we've seen on the streets is evidence that multiculturalism is failing?
I don't think it's right to call Israel a peaceful nation that was minding its own business.
Well, it was at this point in time.
But I think this is the important thing, being able to untangle part of the problem of the rampant anti-Semitism that we're seeing in the West, actually in particular in rising levels in the West, is because of the inability of people to untangle what has been happening in relation to what Jake Wallace-Simons, the editor of the Jewish Chronicles, labelled Israelophobia.
Yeah.
But you know, there are debates to be had about sovereignty, and important ones. I mean, I don't think anyone would stand here and say that Palestinians have no gripe, that there is nothing wrong with the way in which Israel is acting and has acted historically. But at the moment, the actions of an Islamist force, which Hamas is, and in the context of what we've seen with Islamist terrorism, things that have happened in Syria, things that have happened on our own doorstep here in the UK, the question basically comes down to people, which is what side are you on in the battle over Islamism and Islamist terrorism? And it's pretty important to be unequivocal in condemnation of Hamas. And if you think that means giving Israel a free pass, then you have to look at yourself and try and understand why you can't disassociate Jews and Jewish people and anti-Semitism from a criticism of a nation and its actions.